Hi, I'm Clara.
They laughed. That's what I remember most clearly about that day. The way my mother threw her head back like I'd told the world's dumbest joke, and my father clapped his hand against his thigh as if I'd said something truly, outrageously stupid. The laugh wasn't cruel in the usual sense. It wasn't sharp or cutting or even loud. It was the kind that hurt more because of how quickly it faded, as if what I said didn't deserve a real reaction, as if it didn't matter enough to mock. I was 25, sitting at the edge of their polished kitchen island, the glossy tile beneath my elbows and the faint citrus scent of floor cleaner mixing with disappointment. I'd just told them I'd bought a house. Not just any house. A broken one. One they used to drive past on our way to church and shake their heads at. That's the house? My mom finally asked after the laughter died down. The one with the boarded windows and the garage door that looks like it's melting? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence was its own confirmation. They said it was a mistake. A waste. Proof that I was still, after all this time, the impulsive child who used to paint on the walls and hide report cards in my closet.
I didn't argue.
I just stood, walked out of the kitchen, and left their house without saying goodbye. That was a year ago. A year of dust and splinters, of bruised knees and frozen mornings when the pipe screamed in protest. A year of finding mold behind every corner and memories in the most unexpected places, a half-buried photo under the floorboards, a locket tucked behind the bathroom mirror, initials carved into the wood of the back door like someone had once loved this place enough to leave a mark. At first, I thought I'd made a mistake too. I cried the first night I spent there, the kind of crying that comes from exhaustion more than sadness, when the weight of your choices lands all at once. The roof leaked in 3 places. The furnace didn't turn on. The upstairs hallway smelled like damp newspapers and regret. But there was something about it even then. A stubbornness. A quiet whisper that said, if you stay, I'll stay too. I didn't have a lot of money. Just enough for the down payment and a few months of emergency savings I'd promised myself not to touch. But the house was cheap, unreasonably cheap, the kind of cheap that came with warnings and disclaimers and a waiver you had to sign saying you wouldn't sue if you got hurt walking through it. It had been abandoned for a decade, maybe more, depending on who you asked. Some said a fire had gutted the place and left it cursed. Others said it was a drug house in the 90s. One guy at the gas station swore it used to be a funeral home, but I never found proof of that. What I found instead was a mess of decaying wood and broken tiles, wallpaper that peeled off in chunks like dead skin. But I also found bones beneath the surface. Original crown moldings hidden under drop ceilings, hardwood floors buried beneath laminate and wrought, a fireplace so old the bricks had turned a deep smoky red. Every corner I uncovered felt like a memory waiting to breathe again. And that was why I stayed. I worked alone most of the time. I couldn't afford contractors, not yet. Just YouTube tutorials and a few borrowed tools from a friend who said I was out of my mind. Maybe I was. I sanded walls until my arms went numb, pulled nails from the floor until my fingers bled. I watched tutorial after tutorial, slowly learning how to install insulation, how to patch drywall, how to seal windows so the cold wouldn't bite through the frames at night. I slept on an air mattress for 4 months, with a space heater buzzing like a broken fly in the corner. There was no hot water until February. I showered at the gym, dressed in layers, wore gloves inside the house. I ate canned soup by candlelight and tried not to think about how much easier it would be to just give up. But then the neighbor from across the street brought me cookies. Her name was Margie. She'd lived there since 1964 and said she'd watched the house die slowly after the couple who owned it passed. She told me they used to have tulips along the front walkway, the fancy kind with the fringed petals, and every Easter kids from the neighborhood would help plant them. She smiled when she said it, then looked at the cracked concrete path leading to my door and said, "It's good to see someone care again." I didn't say anything, just took the cookies and tried not to cry. Spring brought warmth, and with it progress. I planted seeds along the walkway, tulips, the same kind Margie described. I painted the front door a bold navy blue and polished the brass knocker until it gleamed like a secret. I patched the roof myself, climbing onto it every weekend with a mix of fear and grit I didn't know I had. I learned to tile in the bathroom, installed new kitchen cabinets, sanded the floor down to bare wood, and stained it the color of burnt sugar. Every room took something from me: time, sweat, patience, but gave me something back too. A sense of grounding, of purpose. The house, once a corpse, was starting to come alive again. But not everyone saw that. My parents didn't visit. Not once. They said they were too busy, that it was too far, that I should call when I was done playing house. My mother sent me links to apartments downtown with captions like, "This one has real windows," or "Closet space matters." My father stopped mentioning the house altogether. I think they thought if they ignored it, it would fade away like every other dream I'd chased too far and too fast. But I didn't fade. I fought harder. One night in late July, after 12 hours of scraping and sanding and sealing, I stood in the living room and looked around. The walls were no longer cracked. The ceiling no longer sagged. The light from the chandelier I'd found at a thrift store danced across the polished floor in quiet celebration. I stood there, silent, heart thumping like a slow drumbeat, and whispered, "You're home." The words weren't for me. They were for the house. And maybe, just maybe, it whispered back. The first twist came in August. I was cleaning out the attic when I found it, an old wooden chest hidden behind insulation, dusty and half-buried under a tarp. Inside were blueprints, not of the house as it stood, but of how it had been in the 1920s. It wasn't a funeral home or a drug den, or anything else people assumed. It was a design home, one of the originals built by a woman architect named Eleanor Grant, who'd been erased from most records because she was a woman working in a man's world. She had lived here, built this house herself. And suddenly, everything made sense. The crown moldings, the built-in shelves, the curved archways that didn't match any style I knew. I took the blueprints to the Historical Society, and they nearly jumped out of their chairs. This wasn't just an old house. It was a piece of architectural history.
Forgotten, yes.
But not lost. They asked if I'd consider a restoration grant. I said yes. Within a week, an official from the state came to visit. She walked through each room slowly, touching the walls like she was greeting an old friend. When she reached the fireplace, she turned to me and said, "This is worth saving. Not just the house, but the story." I stood there, in paint-stained jeans and a tired ponytail, and felt something settle in my chest. I was right. They were wrong. This wasn't just a broken house. It was a foundation. And I had laid every stone. The news about Eleanor Grant changed everything. Suddenly, my house wasn't just a personal project. It was a piece of history. The local historical society wanted photos. A university architecture professor emailed asking if he could bring his students to tour the property once it was safe. A small blog in upstate New York wrote an article about the hidden women of early American architecture and mentioned the house by address. I should have been thrilled. And I was mostly. But with attention came scrutiny, and scrutiny has a way of waking up ghosts you didn't even know were buried. A week after the blog went live, someone started leaving notes. Not threatening ones. Just strange. Slipped into the mailbox with no envelope. Folded sheets of lined paper that smelled faintly of cedar. The first one read, "You're digging too deep." I laughed it off. Probably some nosy neighbor who didn't like the paint color I chose. The second one was harder to ignore. "Leave it like it was. Some homes don't want to be remembered." That one made my stomach twist. I didn't tell anyone. What would I say? That a house restoration project was attracting cryptic messages like a ghost story? I kept going. The grant came through in September, enough to hire a contractor for structural support and historical restoration specialists for the facade and the windows. For the first time since I'd bought the house, I wasn't alone in it. People walked through with measuring tapes and clipboards, muttering about angles and weight distribution. I stood in the background, nodding, smiling, but part of me missed the solitude. This house had felt like a secret between me and someone who no longer existed. Now it was being touched, changed, even celebrated. And still, the notes kept coming. They weren't daily. Just enough to make me wonder. Some were typed, Others scrawled in shaky handwriting. One simply said, "Eleanor wouldn't have wanted this." That one stopped me cold. Because how would anyone know what Eleanor wanted? She died in 1947. The Historical Society had confirmed it. And yet, there it was, in ink that looked faded like it had been written decades ago. I started sleeping less, waking up at odd hours. One night, I thought I heard footsteps on the porch, but when I ran outside, there was no one there. Just the tulips, growing stubbornly out of season, pressed low by wind. In October, the Architectural Digest email came. I thought it was spam at first. It wasn't. A writer had seen the blog, then followed the trail to my Instagram, where I'd been posting quiet, moody progress photos, before and afters, peeled paint next to fresh plaster, stained glass washed clean in sunlight. They wanted to do a feature. Not just on the house, but on me. The woman who had bought a condemned property for the price of a used car and turned it into something with breath again. I said yes, though my voice trembled when I typed it. The photographer came first. She wore all black and moved like she was catching whispers. She said the light in the house was strange, soft and shadowy, like a memory. I didn't ask what she meant. I was too busy scrubbing windowsills and touching up paint. When the writer arrived 2 weeks later, she brought with her a small recording device and a voice I recognized from the bylines of stories I devoured in college. Her questions were simple at first. What made you buy this place? How did you learn to renovate? But then she asked, did you ever feel like the house was speaking to you? I froze. Just a second. Long enough for her to notice. She didn't push, just nodded like she understood.
And maybe she did.
There are things about old houses that don't make sense in a spreadsheet. The way a draft moves through a closed door. The smell of lavender in a room no one's entered in weeks. The way your dreams change when you sleep within old walls. But I said nothing. Just smiled and offered her more tea. That night, after she left, I found the worst note yet. It was taped to the inside of my back door. That meant someone had been inside. The message was short. Stop telling her story. She doesn't want to be known. I called the police. They did a quick sweep. Found nothing. Suggested maybe it was a prank or someone trying to scare me into leaving. But they didn't understand. This wasn't fear. It was something else, like being watched not by eyes, but by time itself. The next day, I started installing cameras. November brought cold. The kind that stiffened your joints and made paint dry too slow. I wore layers, gloves, and kept a kettle going on the stove. But the cold wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the attic. I avoided it after the blueprints. I didn't want to know what else it held. But one morning, the contractor said he needed to access a panel above the ceiling joists. We went up together. The air was thick, not dusty.
Heavy.
Like it hadn't moved in years. As he unscrewed a warped panel, I noticed something in the corner. A box. Not like the first chest. Smaller. Personal. Inside was a diary. Eleanor's. At first, I didn't want to read it. It felt like crossing a line. But curiosity is a loud thing. I opened the cover. The pages were dry, yellowed, written in ink that had held steady through the decades. The entries were sparse, sometimes cryptic. Mentions of blueprints, of love lost, of disappointment. But one entry stood out. November 3rd, 1946. They said I couldn't build it. That no woman should leave her mark in stone. But I did. And they came to tear it down. Let them try. I buried the rest where even history won't find it. That line stayed with me. I searched for weeks. Through blueprints, beneath floorboards, even behind walls. Nothing. And then, just before the magazine was set to publish, I found it. A loose tile in the fireplace. Behind it, a metal box. Inside, drawings.
Dozens of them.
Designs that had never been built. A series she called The Quiet Women. Homes designed with hidden rooms, secret spaces. Places to be heard without being seen. Architectural poetry. Genius. And completely unknown. I emailed the magazine. They rewrote the piece. Now it wasn't just about me, it was about Eleanor too. The forgotten architect who defied convention and whispered brilliance into brick and wood. They sent a photographer again. A new one. This time the camera lingered on the details. Curved stairs, hand-carved balusters, the initials e.g. burned into the underside of a window latch. The article went live in early December. And everything changed. The internet exploded. A local news channel called it the architectural discovery of the year. My inbox filled with messages from historians, architects, even Eleanor's distant relatives. The mayor's office sent a certificate of recognition. The house was declared a historical landmark. And my parents, after a full year of silence, finally called. My mother's voice was small.
I saw the article, she said.
I didn't know it was like that. My father asked if they could visit. I said yes. But I didn't know how I felt about it. They came the week before Christmas. Stood in the doorway like guests at a museum. Touched the fireplace like it was a shrine. My mother cried when she saw the tulips. My father said the crown moldings reminded him of his grandmother's house. They looked at me differently. Not like the daughter, who always tried too hard, but like someone they didn't fully understand, and maybe never would. I didn't offer explanations. I didn't need to. The house spoke for itself. But the story isn't over. Because the last note came in January. After the dust settled, after the interviews stopped. It was left on the windowsill, perfectly centered, folded like a prayer. She's proud of you, it said. No name. No clue. Just that. I held it for a long time, then tucked it inside the diary, next to the November 3rd entry. I don't know who wrote it. Maybe Margie. Maybe someone who knew Eleanor once. Or maybe, impossibly, it was her. I don't believe in ghosts. But I believe in legacy. In memory. In the way a house can carry something sacred beneath its decay. I didn't just save a home. I rescued a voice. One that wasn't mine, but somehow became part of me. And now, every morning when the light hits the stained glass just right, I sit at the window with my tea and let the silence settle like a second skin. Not empty. Not haunted. Just alive. Winter passed slowly. The snow piled against the window panes like a secret trying to come in, and the house, so full of warmth and movement for months, fell into a quiet stillness. I stopped hosting contractors. The media interviews faded. Even the neighborhood, once curious and buzzing with questions, stopping to ask. It was as if the house had finally exhaled. I spent my days refinishing what little remained. The banister, the attic trim, the hardware in the pantry that still smelled of dried thyme. It was peaceful, but peace is a strange thing when you've grown used to chaos. It can make silence feel like suspense. And that's when the second twist came. A man showed up at my door. Not a reporter, not a neighbor. He wore a long coat and had eyes that scanned the house like he was remembering it rather than discovering it. He introduced himself as Peter Alcott. Said his grandmother had known Eleanor. Said he used to play in the backyard of this house as a child before it was abandoned. He asked to come in. My instincts prickled, but I let him. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe loneliness. He stepped softly, hands in his coat pockets, and looked around like he was afraid to breathe too loud. He didn't say much, just paused in front of the fireplace and whispered, "She never forgave them for erasing her." Not really. I asked him what he meant, and he smiled the way people do when they're holding back pain. Then he handed me something, a photo, creased and faded. It showed a young woman in front of the house, standing tall with blueprints in one hand and dirt on her cheek. It was Eleanor. On the back, written in flowing ink, were the words, "I'll build what they try to break." Peter didn't stay long. But before he left, he said something I couldn't shake. They didn't just erase her from the records. They tried to take what she made and stamp someone else's name on it. Check the basement. Then he was gone. I stood frozen in the doorway for a long time. My basement was mostly storage now. Some tools, leftover paint, a few boxes of receipts and materials from the early days of renovation. I never looked too closely at the walls. But now I did. The west wall had always seemed oddly thick, like it had been built out from the original foundation. I thought maybe it had been added during a plumbing fix or for insulation. But when I knocked on it, the sound wasn't right. Hollow. Carefully, with a chisel and mallet, I removed a section. Behind it was a narrow cavity. Inside, a tin container sealed shut with wax. My fingers shook as I pried it open. Inside were dozens of letters, each one addressed to a different architectural firm or publication, dated between 1929 and 1944. All from Eleanor. All rejected. The language in the replies was brutal. We don't accept work from unknown women. Try a homemaker's column instead. Design requires authority, something your gender cannot provide. I read them with my chest caving in. She had tried, again and again, to be heard. And every time, the world turned its back. At the bottom of the tin was the final letter. It wasn't a rejection. It was a signed agreement, a contract for the design of a city library that was never built. Or so I thought. The signature at the bottom, where Eleanor's name should have been, was scratched out and replaced with that of a man, Richard C. Lowen. A name I recognized. He was a renowned architect credited with several public buildings across the state. He'd published books, taught courses, and now, holding that contract, I saw the truth. He hadn't designed those buildings. She had. He had stolen her work, and history had applauded him for it. I spent days researching, digging through archives, comparing floor plans. The symmetry, the detailing, the hidden features, every one of them matched Eleanor's drawings. She had been the genius behind half a dozen landmark buildings. But not a single one bore her name. The realization left me sick. This wasn't just about a forgotten architect. It was about theft on a grand scale. Legacy stolen, not by time, but by intent. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to shout it from rooftops. Another part feared no one would believe me. I contacted the university professor, who had emailed months ago. Sent him the files, the blueprints, the letters. He responded with one sentence. This changes everything. Within a week, he'd begun a formal research project. A documentary team reached out. Then another twist. The Lowen Foundation, still active, run by the architect's descendants, sent me a cease and desist. They accused me of slander, demanded I stop linking Eleanor's name to proven Lowen designs. But I didn't back down. I scanned every document, uploaded it all, made it public. Not for attention, for justice, for Eleanor. And the world noticed.
Architecture Forum Liup.
Academic circles buzzed. One by one, experts weighed in, and the truth stood tall. Lowen hadn't designed the Quiet Women series. Eleanor had. Every structure attributed to him bore her invisible fingerprints. It took 2 months, but the momentum built. Pressure mounted. And finally, the truth could no longer be buried. In early spring, the state's architectural archive issued a formal correction. A National Design Award was posthumously renamed, and Eleanor Grant became a household name, nearly a century after she'd been erased. The house changed again after that. People came by just to touch the porch railing or sit on the front steps. Letters arrived from across the country. Young women in architecture programs saying they now had a new hero. One day, a little girl stood outside the gate with her dad. She pointed at the front window and said, "She built that, right?" Her dad nodded, and something warm and painful twisted in my chest. That night, I lit a candle in the attic and placed it beside Eleanor's diary. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. I knew, somehow, that she would have understood. As for my parents, they changed too.
Slowly. Carefully.
My mother asked if I'd show her how to strip old paint. My father brought over a tool set he said he hadn't touched since college. I let them in not just into the house, but into the story. They still didn't understand all of it. But they tried. And that mattered more than I expected. I was offered a book deal. I said yes. The house was featured on Architectural Digest again, this time as the house that changed architectural history. I was invited to speak at a university. A year ago, they laughed when I bought a crumbling wreck. Now they cried when they walked through it, touched the walls, saw Eleanor's name etched in gold at the entrance. But the biggest twist came in June. I received a package. No return address. Inside, a key. A note. There's another one. In Vermont. Built, but never finished. She started it before the contract was stolen. Yours now if you want it. I held the key in my hand for a long time, then looked at the house around me. The one I'd saved. The one that had saved me. I didn't decide right away, but I knew I would go, because this wasn't just a home anymore. It was a legacy, a map of forgotten women written in wood and stone. And someone had to tell their stories. Maybe that someone is me. I didn't go to Vermont right away. The key sat on my desk for weeks, heavy for something so small. I'd pick it up in the quiet hours of the night, hold it between my fingers like a question I didn't yet know how to ask. I told myself I needed time to rest, that I deserved peace after everything. But deep down, I knew it wasn't fear keeping me from leaving. It was something older. The same voice that once whispered, "You're not the kind of person who finishes things." And maybe, for once, I needed to stay still long enough to realize I had already proved that voice wrong. It was the third letter from the Vermont town hall that finally pushed me to act. Handwritten, unlike the first two. Inside was a copy of a deed with Eleanor's name on it, barely legible, but there. The address was real. The property existed. And whoever had sent the key, whoever had known enough to find me, wasn't giving up. Neither should I. The house was in a town called Wexlin, tucked between mountain ridges that looked like folded secrets. I drove up on a gray morning in early July, fog curling over the trees like breath. I didn't expect anything, but I still wasn't ready for what I found. The house was real, but it wasn't whole. The structure stood, tall and skeletal, half-built, frame exposed like a ribcage, roof sagging but holding. It was beautiful, and it was broken. Again, but not abandoned. Someone had been here. The grass was trimmed, the perimeter fenced off with care. On the front beam, spray-painted in fading red, was a date, July 13th, 42. My skin prickled. I checked the calendar. July 13th was 2 days away. I didn't know what that meant, but it felt intentional, like a message left waiting for the right moment. Inside, the air smelled like time, dust and wood and old weather. I walked through slowly.
No inselastion. No waiting.
But the bones were there, the same curved arches, the same symmetry I'd come to know like handwriting. Eleanor had started this, but something had stopped her. In the center of the main room stood a table. On it, another box. Smaller this time. Locked. I didn't force it open. I waited. 2 days passed. I camped on the property, journaled, documented every corner, every beam. I sketched what I imagined Eleanor had seen when she drew these lines. Quiet rooms, tall light, privacy, without isolation. A home designed for recovery. That's when it hit me. This wasn't meant to impress. It was meant to heal. And maybe that's why she never finished it. Maybe she never got the chance. On the morning of July 13th, the lock on the box was gone. Not picked. Not broken. Just gone. Inside were letters again. These different. Unsent. They were written by Eleanor but addressed to someone only as M. Some were long, confessional. Others were half-formed fragments. But one repeated phrase appeared again and again. They threatened to take everything. So I left this behind. Among the letters was a map, hand-drawn, crude, but familiar. It showed the house in Vermont, and 3 others. One in Maine, one in Oregon, one in Georgia. The Quiet Women series hadn't been 6 houses. It had been 10. Only one had ever been officially built.
Mine.
The rest had either been erased or left in pieces. Suddenly, the pattern wasn't just architectural. It was intentional. Eleanor had created a network. Places of refuge. Possibly even resistance. But they had been systematically buried. I didn't know how. Or by who. But someone, maybe Lowen, maybe others, had gone out of their way to dismantle her work. The last twist came as I stood at the back of the Vermont property. There, Tucked beneath a loose stone in the foundation was a leather folder, water-damaged but intact. Inside were photographs, black and white, blurred at the edges. Women standing beside beams, carrying tools, sketching by candlelight. Women who looked like workers, architects, artists. No names, just dates and locations. Eleanor hadn't worked alone. This was a movement, hidden, silenced, and forgotten. I contacted the university again. This time, I brought everything: photos, maps, letters. The professor's response was immediate. We need to publish this. All of it. A historian specializing in erased women in architecture flew in 2 days later. Her team offered to help locate the remaining houses. I agreed, but only on one condition. We restore Vermont first. I stayed, worked on the site daily, hired 2 local women contractors, taught them everything I'd learned in my own restoration. They were fast learners. One of them, a young woman named Aaliyah, said, "It feels like we're building something more than just a house." And she was right. The press returned. Articles began calling Eleanor's project the Hidden Blueprint. A documentary was greenlit. A foundation formed. Funds came in not for profit, but for justice, to restore each house, to archive each letter, to name every woman involved. My name was mentioned, sometimes as the one who unearthed the legacy. But I corrected them every time. I didn't find Eleanor. She found me, and I simply listened. Back at my original house, Margie came by with cookies again. She handed me a small envelope, said she found it taped to her porch. It was a photo of my house, a modern shot, but written across the bottom in elegant ink. She finished what they tried to bury.
No signature.
My parents visited again. This time, they brought Joy, my niece. She ran through the rooms barefoot and said she wanted to build a house like mine someday. My mother said softly, "You did what none of us believed was possible." My father added, "You built more than a house. You built a truth." I didn't cry, but my voice trembled when I said thank you. Not because they believe me now, but because it no longer mattered whether they did. The Vermont house opened to the public the following spring. Not as a museum, as a learning center. For women in trades, in design, in art. A place to continue what Eleanor had started. And I stood there on opening day, watching strangers walk through the doors she never lived to see finished. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I just placed my hand against the frame she once built and whispered, "We remember now." Spring bled into summer with the kind of golden days that made the Vermont house glow. The Learning Center opened quietly, with no ribbon cutting or political handshakes. Just open doors and women walking in with tool belts, notebooks, and questions. Aaliyah became the on-site manager. She started a mentorship program, built from the same values Eleanor must have held. Work quietly, leave boldly, let no one claim your blueprints but you. I didn't plan to stay long, but I kept finding reasons not to leave. Every week, someone new reached out. A student writing a thesis. A historian who'd found a crumbling wall in Oregon that matched Eleanor's drawings. A woman in Georgia who'd grown up near an abandoned brick home and swore it felt haunted with potential. We traced back timelines, matched building permits, and with each name and location, the network of Eleanor's quiet women grew. What had once been a whisper of an idea was now a movement being rebuilt beam by beam. And then came the letter. It was mailed directly to the Vermont house. No name on the envelope. No return address. Just a single sentence inside. She was not the only one. Attached was a photocopy of a journal page, this one not in Eleanor's hand. The signature read Ruth Calderon. I'd never heard the name before, but the writing was unmistakable. Architectural measurements, a date from 1939, and one phrase underlined 3 times. Blueprint sent to EG for safekeeping. Eleanor hadn't just built her own houses. She'd collected others as well. Women like her, working in the shadows, passing ideas like notes in the back of a classroom that history refused to grade. This wasn't just a forgotten architect. This was an erased sisterhood. We dug deeper. Each new house revealed something, symbols carved into beams, initials etched beneath stairs, messages layered behind wallpaper. One home had a poem hidden under the floorboards. Another held a rolled parchment behind a fake panel in the wall. Names, dates, coordinates. A network that hadn't just designed homes but built a way to survive a world that erased them. A revolution in quiet, crafted lines. We weren't just restoring houses anymore. We were restoring stories. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole. But the final twist didn't come from a letter or blueprint. It came from my mother. She visited Vermont alone one afternoon unannounced. She brought a tin box from her attic, one I hadn't seen since I was a child. Inside were sketches, drawings of rooms, angled light, lofty spaces with reading nooks and spiral staircases made of light. She had drawn them herself, she said. When she was 17, she'd applied to an architecture program in college once, but withdrew before the first day. I didn't think I was allowed to build things, she said softly, placing a hand on the rough pine table we'd sanded together that morning. No one ever told me I could, and I saw it then. This wasn't just Eleanor's legacy. It was mine. It was my mother's. It was every woman who had ever been told that building things was someone else's job. And now we were building anyway. That night, I walked alone through the Vermont house. The halls no longer echoed like an empty shell. They felt lived in, even before they truly were. I stepped into what would become the library, leaned against the wall, and slid down to sit on the cool hardwood floor. A single draft moved through the window, brushing the curtain like a breath. I pulled Eleanor's final note from my pocket, the one that had been tucked in the box behind the Vermont Foundation. I hadn't shared it with the others. Not yet. It read, "If you're reading this, you found me. But more importantly, you remembered me." And maybe that's all I ever wanted. Not fame. Not applause. Just to know that when they built over us, someone would one day dig us back up and say, "You were here. She was here. They all were. And now so was I." Weeks later, I stood in front of my first house again. The navy door. The tulips. The brass knocker. Margie had passed the previous winter, peacefully, in her sleep. Her daughter had left a small plaque by the garden, for those who plant things that grow after they're gone. I placed a tulip in a jar and set it next to the plaque. Then I unlocked the door, stepped into the house that had started it all, and let the memories wash over me. It was different now. Less haunted. Less fragile. A friend of mine, an editor at a major publishing house, wanted to turn the story into a book. Not a memoir. A documentation. A tribute. We called it The Quiet Women. The proceeds would go to restoring the remaining houses and offering scholarships to women in architecture and trades. The publisher called it a legacy project. I just called it necessary. My final act was quiet. I returned to the attic of my original house and opened the floorboard I had once pried up to find Eleanor's diary. Inside, I placed a copy of the book, a bracelet, a photo of my mother's drawings, and a letter that simply read, "We remembered, and we told the world." I sealed the floorboard again, not because I wanted it hidden, but because someone else would find it one day. Maybe a girl like me. Maybe a woman standing where I once stood, wondering if her story mattered. And when she read it, I wanted her to know that it did. The house that had once been broken now stood as proof. Not just of survival, but of voice. Not just of one woman's resilience, but of many. Each board, each line, each beam, evidence that you could be forgotten and still found. That you could be erased and still remembered. My parents laughed when I bought that broken house. They cried when it made history. But me? I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I built. And finally I rested.